The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone to this webinar for 2020, our first from the Insights point of view here at the IWFM. And today our webinar is going to focus on a very important subject within facilities management and generally across the built environment in terms of asbestos and the management around that. So hopefully the webinar promises what it says on the screen there in front of you, a guide to successful asbestos management. And we have three very high skilled speakers around the subject to hopefully address that for you moving forward. So as I say, this is the first webinar of the year for the 2020 from the Insights team here at the Institute for Workplace and Facilities Management. Just to remind those people that have joined us, this is a live webinar and it will be recorded. So there will be cascaded. So for your colleagues and clients alike, that this webinar can be shared post this live presentation. So I'm Peter Brogan, Head of Research and Insight. I have updated my picture. I know we've got some people that are long-standing webinar audience, so at last I've updated. So that's what I look like, the voice behind who you're hearing from this initial start of the presentation. Essentially, my remit is, if it was only as simple as those 3 bullet points, is first-class research and insight, supporting FMs and developing content. And this slide probably represents it a lot better in terms of what I mean by that. In terms of the information, our good practice guides, which a lot of our members and even non-members do utilise. I know it's a membership offering, but they are cascaded across the industry. They can be downloaded from our website. But also what we've ramped up, particularly in the 5 years that I've been at the Institute, is some of our insight portfolio. So looking at things such as the market outlook, how the market is looking, sustainability projects, partnerships with organisations around research. And a lot of that can be found on the insights section of our website. So it's not a plug for my division, it's just access for members and non-members beyond this presentation, where the presentation will be housed in terms of the webinar, but also the other material that you have access to as a member, and hasten to add as a non-member as well, from that point of view. So as promised, we've got 3 key speakers around the subject today of asbestos management. We've got Jonathan Ford, who's going to be our first speaker, Quality Management Asbestos WYG Limited. We've got Mike Halen, Consulting Services Manager at Ashuri Consulting. And we've also got Richard Banyan, Owner and Managing Director, Ion Consultants Limited. So it's going to be run in that order. But just a little bit more about Jonathan, who's our first speaker today, and the titles there in terms of what he will be discussing in the angle of his presentation. That Jonathan is WYG's Asbestos Consultancy Quality Manager with over 17 years experience in the asbestos industry. So as promised, someone that certainly knows a lot about the subject area. He's responsible for quality control under UCAS accreditation and for training in relation to asbestos. So not only are you listening from an expert, you're listening from the trainer perspective as well. The role and responsibility for growth of WYG's UCAS accredited asbestos capability, supervision of internal and external quality control schemes. Managing the training, as I said, and audit regimes for surveys and analytical activities. And developing and delivering, if I could only say it, UK ATA's approved training courses. Jonathan also provides gap analysis for asbestos management plans and assists clients in their wider compliance with, say, CAR 2012, which may be familiar to some of our audience. So Jonathan, I'd like to just hand over to you in terms of control. So hopefully this works, technology allowing it. So Jonathan, you can take it away.
Cool, thank you very much, Peter. Yeah, hi everyone, my name is Jonathan Ford, and I'll just launch straight into it, no time is always precious. Here we go. So when we're looking at managing asbestos risks, managing asbestos, what kind of risks are we actually talking about? So the primary ones are to do with exposure to asbestos and the spread of asbestos as well. So the 2 big elements that are covered off in the regulations. That's why we have this duty to manage. This is what we're trying to actually manage. So airborne exposure could arise from damage to asbestos materials. So you'll see this acronym ACM, which is asbestos containing material. Okay, so that's things like AIB, cement, pipe lagging, that kind of material. So general knocks, bumps and scrapes against that can potentially lead to a asbestos exposure. Or working on asbestos containing materials. So you've got contractors on your site where they've not read the asbestos management plan on the register, so they're going to be at risk of damaging these ACMs and exposing themselves and others to airborne asbestos fibre. Going into contaminated areas, so you may have areas where you know there's damaged ACMs, or where you've taken over a building where there's damaged ACM, or where you've been the victim of vandalism in one of your properties. Where you've had contractors who are jet washing asbestos cement roofs. This is actually alarmingly common, and it is definitely not to be permitted. HSE have prosecuted contractors who are doing this kind of work. And then any other asbestos work where there are inadequate control measures applied. So those control measures are supposed to reduce airborne fibre and therefore exposure. But sometimes those control measures may slip or not be implemented effectively. Aside from that, you've also got a spread of contamination. So anywhere where a contractor has used equipment to work on ACMs and has then transferred that equipment to another location to use it again, you've got a potential spread of contamination. Where you've got staff transiting through contaminated areas, or where you're working on development sites, you may be excavating soils that are contaminated with asbestos or asbestos-containing materials. So you're looking at the stockpiles of material itself and also material that's tracked around on the vehicles and equipment. And then again, any other asbestos work with inadequate control measures can lead to the spread of contamination. So which staff, which occupations are going to be the most at risk from those above two categories? So within buildings, all your tradesmen basically within a building, including right at the bottom of the list on the left-hand column, you've got your building services, including your architects and surveyors. Just above those, you've also got all your engineer staff, which are often overlooked because they don't think that they're doing work on the building fabric, but they're either entering your crawl spaces, your ducts, your risers, or they're knocking holes through partitions, including fire breaks, which may be AIB, in order to feed cables and pipes through. So their work needs to be very closely managed. And then when you're working on your development sites, you've also got all of your geoenvironmental consultants and land surveyors, your GI workers, construction workers, demolition, the excavator operators, and other land remediation contractors may all be at risk of either disturbing ACMs, spreading them, or being exposed to the airborne fibre. Okay, so if somebody has become exposed to asbestos fibre, what are the implications? Why is it such a dangerous thing, a dangerous event? Well, asbestos fibre can enter the body through three main ways, or through three ways. The primary one is obviously inhalation. Next up is ingestion, and then it can also be absorbed through the skin. So if it's via inhalation, this leads to lung diseases, and the lung diseases are here at the bottom. So you've got mesothelioma, which is a cancer of the lining of the lungs or stomach. It's primarily associated with asbestos exposure. There may be lung cancer, and you're at increased risk of this if you also smoke, as well as becoming exposed to asbestos fibre. You've got asbestosis, which is not a cancer, but it's a physical scarring of the lung tissue, thickening them and reducing their ability to transfer oxygen and CO2 across your lung membranes. And then you've got pleural plaques, which are those membranes around the lungs. It's a thickening or calcifying of those membranes. Okay. Through ingestion, you can also get intestinal and abdominal cancers, and through skin absorption, through handling asbestos materials directly, you can also get asbestos warts. Okay, so how frequently do these diseases occur? Well, they've been building up over time, and around about now, we're looking at about 2,500 cases per year of both mesothelioma and lung cancer. And the HSE expects this figure to start tailing off throughout the next decade, but we've yet to see a consistent tailing off. We're still at a bit of a plateau. And lower down, this other darker red line here, you can see that's tracking asbestosis deaths. Okay, so again, much lower scale, but still increasing to the current date. Okay, so all of the asbestos-related diseases that cause death, so asbestosis, mesothelioma, and lung cancer, they are all accrued here in this bottom column, and you can see a total number of asbestos deaths per year of over 5,500 deaths. And to kind of put that into context, all your other workplace fatalities, so vehicle strikes, electrocution, drowning, asphyxiation, explosion, lots of other causes of death only account for 147 per year. So that's not including all your injuries, but actual fatalities. So you can see that that figure is dwarfed by the number of workers who die per year from their past exposure to asbestos. And then a bit of further context, the last year we got figures for so far from HSE, about 1,800 people died in car accidents, in road traffic accidents, in or out of the workplace. So again, 3 times as many people died of asbestos-related illnesses than died on the country's roads. Okay, so leading into our management responsibilities. So the primary management responsibility comes from the CAR 2012 regulations, which is what Peter referred to earlier. So CAR is the control of asbestos regulations. And regulation 4 within there is the duty to manage. So this is the duty to manage any asbestos in non-domestic premises. Okay, so this requires you to identify the location and condition of asbestos in non-domestic premises and to manage the risk in order to prevent harm to anyone who works on the building or to other building occupants. So within the regulation and in the ACOP is number L143, which you can download for free off HSE's website. It also explains what's required of the duty holders, including a duty to cooperate with the main duty holder. So any contractors or panel consultants that you may have working for you for your estate, they've also got a duty to cooperate with you in delivering the duty to manage. Okay. And the non-domestic premises part also includes the common parts of domestic premises. So if you manage, say, a block of flats, things like the lift lobbies, the lifts themselves, the plant and service areas, they are all covered by the asbestos regulations, whereas the flats or apartments themselves would not be until they became a place of work for somebody such as a refurbishment contract, in which case it does apply in full. Okay, so who is the actual duty holder then? In the regulation, it says the person with the main responsibility for maintenance or repair, that is the primary duty holder. Okay. However, depending on what the contractual arrangements are, that could be the owner, the landlord, a managing agent, a subletter, the occupier, or the tenant. Any of those could be the duty holder, but regardless, they all need to cooperate in delivering the compliance with the duty to manage. So all parties must cooperate, provide access to the building, and share any information they have about the asbestos materials. Okay. So within our duties to manage, our duty holder responsibilities, we can break that down a little bit as follows. So we need to assess what material we've got. So that means ensuring a suitable and sufficient assessment. So typically a management asbestos survey followed by your annual asbestos re-inspections. Okay. To record, so whatever the survey output was, stating these are the ACMs that you've got in these locations and these quantities and these conditions, make sure that's recorded, including updating it. So every review, so your re-inspections, make sure that gets logged as well. Any asbestos materials that are found needs to be managed. So there's not a duty to remove. There is no duty to remove all of your asbestos. The duty is to remove it so far as is practical. And then what you can't remove or what's not economical to remove, you can safely manage it in situ as long as your obviously site operations aren't going to interfere or damage with it. Okay. And then finally, there is a duty to remediate if necessary. So you must properly maintain your asbestos or remove it if necessary. Okay. Moving on, so that's a quick overview then of the duty to manage. So if I can touch on the Faculty of Asbestos Assessment and Management, which is part of today's session. So FAM, as we shorten it to, is a sub-faculty of the Faculty of Occupational Hygiene within the British Occupational Hygiene Society. Okay, within FAM, you've got multiple levels of membership. So everything from a technician who may have one or more proficiency certificates in the BOHS, or to an associate who may have more than one, so 2 or 3, obviously a licentiate who's a certified competent person. They hold a certificate of competence for asbestos. And then obviously a full member is someone who has that same qualification but has been operating at a higher level for a number of years. And then over the next 5, or in about 5 years' time, the faculty will be able to offer fellowship grade membership. Okay, and then overseeing these, we have the FAM committee, of which I'm a part, where we monitor the membership, we drive the recruitment, and we seek ways of adding greater value to both the members and the end users of the FAM membership, so that being the employers and the clients themselves. So the objectives of FAM are to help ensure that asbestos professionals can operate with the relevant levels of competency and expertise, to reduce the ongoing issues caused by asbestos through the above, and to drive the career and professional development of our members at all levels. Okay. Now, why do we need FAM then? Well, at the moment, once you've got your PCERT or your RSPH equivalent certificates, there's no further requirement to develop yourself, to expand your knowledge, to gain a greater understanding of the industry and of the issues around the management of asbestos. So what FAM seeks to do is, through applying a CPD requirement on all members, we make those who hold whichever level of membership seek to expand their horizons within the asbestos field. Okay, and then for each of the different levels, what does that then offer to those individuals? It allows you to be part of a professional network, accessing the latest technical publications, gaining expert industry advice through bulletins issued by the committee, free attendance at the BOHS regional meetings, access to the online forums and use of the BOHS online searchable directories. Helps us to keep updated with industry news. Those who are members who have the post-nominal letters, it gains them additional recognition within the asbestos industry. Okay, and then that can be used to enhance your career progression. Okay, so whether it's yourselves you're looking at joining as a member or as a licentiate, it can be used to enhance your own career progression, and it can also help yourselves in choosing consultants to work for you. It can give you an extra differentiator between the different candidates you may have in front of you. Okay, so who's going to benefit then? The individuals themselves can obviously be used to drive their career progression and their advancement. It's a resource for gaining of knowledge. It's a means to showcase that they're keen to develop themselves rather than just being a vanilla consultant. And the CPD tracking helps them in that goal, and it makes them more attractive to potential employers. For employers, it allows them to differentiate candidates, so new recruits. It's a means to encourage their staff to progress through the grades and develop their careers internally. And then the CPD tracking again helps demonstrate that the consultancy is promoting best practice and their staff potential. And then as a client, so this is possibly more aimed at yourselves then, it allows you to be better able to differentiate the standards of staff development between the different suppliers, e.g. during tendering exercises. And it gives you that extra layer of competency assurance when you're getting advice from consultants. So you see not just what proficiency certificates they may have, but at what level they're actually operating at within the industry. Okay, so if you want any more information about FAM and the faculty, you can visit iamfam.org and there'll be more information, including how you may wish to join yourselves. That's available for you there. Okay, Peter, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. That's great. And obviously from the Institute, the IWFM's perspective, we are looking at more, obviously, collaboration with the Institute. Jonathan's just kindly gone through there in terms of moving on the discussion purely from this webinar. So hopefully there'll be more news shortly on that. But again, a great start, Jonathan, to this. I just want to remind our audience there are a question section, so keep firing your questions in. I'm aware of time, so enough from me. So I want to move to our next speaker, and that's Mike Eiling. If you recall, Consultancy Services Manager from Assurity Consulting Limited, who I introduced earlier. Just a little snippet about Mike. Mike joined Assurity Consulting in 1993 as an environmental consultant. He's done a lot for us at the IWFM in the sense of speaking at various events, that's at conferences as well as trade shows. and has presented on asbestos, air and water quality, Legionella, energy and the environment, just to name a few subjects, and many more, hasten to add. He also has qualifications including the P402 asbestos surveyor and the P405 in asbestos management, and also previous worked as an asbestos analyst. So again, an individual with a strong background and experience in the subject matter. So enough from me as promised. I'd like to pass over to Mike. And once again, technology should be working. So Mike, over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter and Jonathan. Good afternoon, everyone. As Peter said, my name's Mike Ayling, and what I'd like to do this afternoon is just take you through my experiences of things I've found out on sites or in customers' buildings when I've been carrying out all the different disciplines that I cover. I'll skip over this slide because obviously we've had a very good introduction there. So moving on, I just want to start by going through a brief overview of the asbestos management process, and I'd like to look at policies, responsibilities, survey and risk assessment, written schemes, training, implementing controls, checking, inspecting and monitoring, records and review. So some of you might recognise this as loosely based on the Health and Safety Executive's guidance, but I thought I'd put it in these areas so it's clear the areas that you may need to go and check on in your own buildings to make sure you're successfully managing asbestos. If we take policies to begin with, time and time again, I just see a very basic generic policy, and there isn't really specific to the organisation concerned. It's an ideal opportunity to make that policy specific to yourselves to ensure that if later looked at, it can be purely identified as your organisation's policy. What also I'd like to see in policies are certain measurables, and this allows anyone looking at the system to see if you've put anything in there to be able to judge the policy as being successful. Also, it's always good to have a review date on there. It just gives us an indication of whether there is a review process in place and is it actually reviewed on a regular basis. And one thing we often don't see too much is it's not signed and dated. Now, ideally, it should be signed by the statutory duty holder because it is their commitment to the appointed responsible person to make sure the funds available to successfully manage asbestos. If we move on to the second part, which is the responsibility tree, this is where we would really like to see everyone who's involved in asbestos management at that organisation should be included on this. Often we see that a deputy appointed responsible person is missing, and all the other people that work alongside the appointed responsible person not detailed. Also, making sure that there is emergency contact details and names and titles so those people can be contacted very, very quickly. And also we want specific responsibilities detailed. So who is going to be taking responsibility for what part of asbestos management? If we go on to part 3, and this was alluded to earlier on, we're talking about asbestos surveys, and this forms the real basis of your asbestos management. And as Jonathan said, mostly it's done in a survey. Some of these surveys can vary in dates. Sometimes, because there's been a change in regulations over the years, sometimes the surveys may predate a regulation, which means they haven't looked at it in the same sort of way. From my experience doing surveys over 30 years, they've changed quite a lot since the early 90s to the present day. So there's different processes in place. Also, check your specification of the survey as well to make sure that everywhere's been looked at. So there might be large areas of the building that haven't been surveyed, and the survey may have been done for a different reason. You also need to check the caveats as well, because also, you know, if they haven't included things like electrical boxes or gaskets, then this could also mean that there's big gaps in your asbestos management. Making sure they look at the external areas of the building, even if there's any outbuildings and those sorts of things, make sure that they're included. And make sure that those areas that haven't been accessed actually make it to your asbestos register, because otherwise they tend to get missed, and then people look at the register and say, oh, there isn't any asbestos there, when that may not be the case. Okay, I've put this in because it's also quite interesting. If you have a record of exactly where the surveyor went, you will clearly understand which parts of the building that they've been to. So when I'm saying that, it's a really good idea to have a walls, floors and ceiling detail of what's in each and every room. That means that the surveyor goes to those areas and they write down exactly what they find in that room. So you can refer back to the survey if there's anyone challenging you, if they go into an area and say, well, I think that's asbestos. You can refer back to the list and say, actually, the surveyor went in there and they said it was just plasterboard, for example. Okay, sometimes we don't see photographs, and sometimes the perspective in the photograph doesn't really help in identifying the location of the asbestos containing material. So another important part of management is also floor plans as well. If you have the register, a photograph and the floor plans, you should clearly understand, or everyone concerned should understand, where that piece of asbestos is. Okay, if we move on to the risk assessment, so off the back of your survey, you should have a material assessment score, which looks at things like product type, extent of damage, surface type, and asbestos type. That will give you an overall score. So this is the basis to start forming your management practices. What we do find is surveys, and if they're before the 2012 regulations, they won't have a material assessment score as accurately detailed as post 2012 when further guidance was given. So we're really looking at those material assessment scores, and then we have to do a priority assessment score. So this is the thing that the customer should do themselves, or they can have help from the surveyor. But because it's things like, what is the main type of activity in the area? What is the accessibility? How many numbers of occupants, frequency of use of the area, and average time of use? We need input from the customer in order to make sure that the total risk assessment score is as accurate as it could possibly be. And this may, if the scores are coming out too high, it may be that you think that you may need to remove the asbestos when actually you can keep it in situ and manage. So we add the material assessment to the priority assessment score to give you a total risk assessment score. And I've just mentioned there, is it in line with the guidance since the surveys? Who's carried out the priority assessments? Always worth checking on that they have adequate knowledge of the building. And do the scores add up, and are they realistic? That's another thing to check. There is a free download guide on the Health and Safety Executive's website called Material and Priority Scoring Tool. So you can download that. It tells you how to score each individual bit of your asbestos, so you can challenge the scores that maybe are on your register. And the most important thing, if any of the scores changes, if anything becomes damaged, or a storeroom becomes an office, for example, make sure that you update that score on the register. Okay, and as I said earlier, this is a really important part to base the setting your priorities for your management plan. Okay, if we go on to the management plan itself, now, the asbestos management system, which is pretty much what I'm talking about overall, does get mixed up with the asbestos management plan sometimes. So the actual asbestos management plan should have a summary. It should also have a summary of tasks, So who's going to be doing what? A procedure for monitoring the condition of your ACM, a procedure for remedial work, and a procedure for removal work. And then finally, an emergency procedure for what happens if something's damaged or you discover something that you may think is asbestos. So that is the most important part, your asbestos management plan, of your asbestos management system. When we look at training, which is the fifth part of this loop, we're looking, have people had awareness training? Have they had training on their asbestos management system? There are many, many different management systems out there, but it's making sure that everyone who's involved in that responsibility tree knows the workings of the asbestos management system. There could be management training required from your appointed responsible person, or even the statutory duty holder may need some sort of management training. Have your contractors been trained, or do you train contractors yourself? And then it's really capturing all those people that work in the building. So if you have people in the building that may not come through a permit to work system, for example, it's making sure that they don't just go and drill something into a wall just because they've been asked to. Okay, implementing controls. I could talk about this for quite a long time, but really I've just put this up. There's been a letter out there from the Health and Safety Executive talking about dark blue gaskets, and if you see the date of the letter, it's 30th of October 2017, which was well past the year 2000 cutoff. So it's worth considering. If any new information comes to light, what do you do with it? Moving on to checking, inspecting and monitoring, you must ensure that each ACM has been regularly checked, inspected, and this is documented. And more importantly, as I said earlier, the changes in the risk assessment score are noted. And then also detail the frequency of inspection, which should come out the back of the risk assessment, a minimum of annual, but some certain areas or some types of asbestos may need to be inspected on a more frequent basis, maybe 6 monthly or even quarterly in some cases. If we go on to the records, what we really like to see is a robust asbestos historical record. I know that is quite difficult. We normally find gaps, but just gather as much information as you can and keep hold of it forever. Okay. All refurbishment history, that's also useful because then that tells you what materials are been used in the refurbishment. Again, we don't often come across the complete history of that, but the more information, the better. And then finally, what we like to see is all the removal records, the air clearance testing, the reassurance tests, the leak tests, the personal exposure records, consignment notes, and that sort of thing. And again, it's matching those up. Sometimes it's quite difficult to do, but if you look at dates, if you have a removal project ongoing, you can match up the certain certificates with the dates. That gives you a good idea of what's been disposed of, for example. Okay, and finally, we go on to the asbestos management review. So it's really good to do a review of your asbestos management as it is with all the other different health and safety disciplines. Do you have someone do it externally, or do you have someone do it internally, or do you have both? There's a lot of organizations that tend to do one internally and one externally and discuss the differences between the two. Okay, so what I've really been doing is just taking you around this loop, if you like, of successful management of asbestos. And it doesn't really matter where you start. We started with policies and ended with the review, but that just gives you a good idea of all the things that are required in a really good asbestos management system. Okay, that's me done. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mike. Sorry, I just hit the button too quickly there. So thank you for your presentation. Again, any questions there, keep firing through. We have got some questions coming through based on Jonathan and Mike, some of your talk. So we do have that question section at the end just to remind people once again. So moving on, with last but not least, our final speaker on this webinar, and again, Richard Bennion, owner and managing director of Ion Consultants Limited. Just once again, a bit of background about Richard. He's a pragmatic and energetic safety, health and environmental leader. Once again, with a lot of experience, with 23 years experience to be precise, operating as an advisor and mentor to directors, senior leaders and other professionals. His diverse experience successfully influencing internal and external stakeholders to establish robust risk management systems. Richard has extensive experience leading and embedding construction design and management processes within large projects and working as a certified auditor to the ISO standards within this field. As mentioned there, his experience is diverse. It ranges from logistics, construction, utilities, FM, engineering, healthcare, and highway maintenance. Just to follow the trend of our previous two speakers, this gentleman knows his stuff purely on his background. So, Richard, over to you. And as I say, benefits of the membership of that institute. Okay.
Brilliant. Thanks for that introduction there, Peter. That's really great. Hopefully you can hear me all loud and clear there. So yeah, I've got control of a couple of slides I wanted to talk through. I've been involved with the BOHS for quite some time myself, so I've seen FAM, the faculty that Jonathan just talked through and gave an overview of, develop quite well over the last few years. And really, I just wanted to give some more client-side experience around FAM, what BOHS membership can do for you guys as more of a FM provider in the sector, what it means to you. So I've just got a couple of slides just to talk through there. Let's see if this just works here. Okay, so here we go. Yeah, that's all working fine. So what's the problem? I've said, so what's the problem? All of the suppliers, the consultants using the asbestos industry, they've got a UCAS badge. That's maybe a bit of a sweeping statement, but effectively a lot of the inspection bodies, testing bodies will have some sort of quality management system, whether it's a 9001 system or whether it's something that's actually more extensively certified by UCAS to 17020 for inspections and 17025 for testing and analytics. So within that umbrella organization, that business, they've got individuals in there, and that's really where FAM is starting to focus on this. It's looking at how individuals can demonstrate they've got the skills, knowledge and experience to be able to do the job for you guys, for the client side, and understand really what's required. I've worked as a client for a national logistics organization more recently. They've got big red vans, if that gives you a clue. So I've been involved with how they manage asbestos, and we used FAM as part of our criteria around employing individuals to help demonstrate competence. So I've just broken this down into, I think, 3 key areas. What, in addition to having those baseline competencies, the qualifications that Jonathan mentioned, things like the P402 for surveying, P405 for managing asbestos in buildings, etc. The membership itself, like any other professional organisation like IOSH, whether it's IEMA or whether it's IWFM, they will have more extensive access to resources to help you as an individual develop skills. And the way I see it, there's some key areas around soft skills that will help your suppliers, your consultants that you're engaged with, be better for you and help you work more efficiently. So things like report writing is quite important. It's a skill set to be able to communicate large quantities of data in a simplified and easy way for more laymen to understand. Communication techniques themselves, being able to pitch to the right level, so whether it's talking to engineers or building occupants, or whether it's dealing with senior leadership teams and giving quite concise information, more perhaps biased towards financial side of things, or whether it's more around statutory compliance side of things for those guys, or whether you're communicating at different levels lower down about concerns of risk, etc., actually at the building itself. So having an ability to be able to develop skills in that area I see as a real positive. Managing conflict, I think it's a really emotive world in asbestos, especially when things aren't going so well. If there's damage, if there's a lot of concerns around what it means to an individual, how an incident may affect their health. It can be quite a tricky situation to try and keep everybody's emotions in check, and having an ability and skill set around that to be able to, again, communicate in a way and put people at ease is really important. So those sort of areas of CPD within the FAM world I see as being developed over a period of time, and sort of something that hopefully will be brought to life a little further. Dealing with incidents and emergencies as well links in with that piece, and again, a skill set which consultants and members of FAM can really support on if they've got some good experiences and knowledge in that area around what sort of information is required. Core knowledge, and again, this is something that's outside of maybe that standard proficiency module knowledge that's taught, and when you're working in a UCAS organisation, it's sometimes out of scope, but really important, again, to the facilities management world, is project management skills. So understanding how that works, understanding the processes around it, whether you're using programs against REBA stages, whether you're looking at project management in respect of programs and design team requirements as well. So again, that's another area to ensure CDM compliance is brought in around the asbestos side of things. And again, things like core safety and health and core environmental practices. So again, everybody's got an ability around that, but specialisms tend to be around more things like confined space access or understanding clients' areas, which can be quite unique sometimes. So whether you're working in explosive atmospheres or something like that is again something where there'll be more knowledge required and experience required. And again, by being members of FAM, you'll be able to get more diverse CPD and again become a better practitioner. Environmental core knowledge, things like, I'm always thinking trade effluent discharge consents and all of the water and land issues that can be brought around. So again, good areas to have a firm understanding around. Third-party issues, again, is another knowledge area where wider knowledge shared around what highways expectations are for notices, especially around scaffolds, for example, when they're installed to perhaps facilitate asbestos work, and knowing the timeframes around that and who to speak to. Utilities in a similar way as well, around sort of way leaves and timelines is again useful information to be aware of, and obviously engaging with enforcing authorities and having a relationship there that they can actually perhaps put them at ease on behalf of their clients is another useful skill set. CDM requirements I've already mentioned, so I think that's just quite an important area to understand the core principles around what the principal designers will require, what clients will need from an initial brief and assessing information. And I think, as Mike talked about, things like refurbishment, management survey data, how that all links into a project. And finally, on knowledge, having an understanding of you guys and FM providers as a client, so what the estate means, how acquisitions are dealt with through diligence exercises, how mothballing is managed, and how asbestos management fits into those sort of areas as well. So again, knowledge that may be gained certainly through being part of the organisation. I think finally for this section, I think the FAM piece also brings some real relevance around having suitable CPD processes, being able to demonstrate through records that you are maintaining those skills. It gives you a clear commitment as well to the profession, so there is actually individuals who are really signed up to that code of conduct and are committed to providing the best service they can, so it helps them stand out. And the final slide is just going through, so what's the value around this piece? So from my perspective, looking at it from the client side, we've used it for membership, which can be detailed in specifications when we've set up contracts of work or even frameworks. So we're looking for the lead to have maybe full membership and blend that in with the different levels within the FAM faculty. So we can look towards analysts and surveyors having a certain, perhaps slightly more junior level, but certainly the actual team has got that sort of overreaching full member in there as well. Okay. So the next point I just wanted to raise was around improvement of skills to help communicate and competence helps on that around the membership. You've got the cooperation piece and the control around that as well, to get the information over to key people that they're talking to. You've also got development of project management roles to plan, manage and monitor programs of work. So actually members can actually think about the inspection processes, the timelines, accessing information as well, and being able to work with you guys as a client and be able to really support you on that, and having that experience will be helpful. Understanding how asbestos data is managed, so the different systems that are out there, the different ways that data interact with each other. I always think asbestos data is king, so keeping that up to date, being able to interpret it, but also being able to marry systems together and being able to understand how to do that is really important from a full member and a member perspective. And alignment and commitment, so that really, again, talks around more understanding what the duty holder and the client side requirements are. So it's not just from what they do as a practitioner. Maybe it's monitoring, maybe it's inspections, maybe it's testing. It's really flipping it the other way and thinking about, well, what does the client want and how can I help provide the best service I can around their requirements? So again, membership will help demonstrate that piece as well. The CPD I've mentioned, I think that's just really important piece, just to be able to demonstrate that you are competent at that level as well. So maintaining that's really important. I thought this was the last slide. There is one more slide, I think. So in summary around just really what we're thinking there is it provides some assurance of individuals working for you who are members of FAM, and on that basis they can demonstrate competence. They've got ethical conduct. They've signed up to the code of conduct set out by the BOHS and the faculty. They've got knowledge and they're continuing to improve their skills and develop themselves as an individual and be the best they can. It's a means of specifying the talent that's required for you as well. So you've actually got levels that you can actually look at and speak to and think about weaving into the way you organise yourself when you're looking at competent assistants. It provides a more rounded and in-tune individual ultimately within the industry, so they've got that broader experience and they can share that then with their colleagues and customers. And that's it from me. So it was a little shorter sort of session, but I think that just encapsulates some of the areas that we've already mentioned. But I think from my side, that's really where we've seen it as benefit already, that we can really use the membership levels to help specify and engage with the right people. Okay, Peter.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for that. And I think that was a nice way to end a nice stream amongst the respective presentations on what we've covered today. So as promised and said throughout the presentation, you got probably fed up with me keep reminding the audience around this about our questions section. And as promised, we have got questions coming in. So I'm just going to start with this question, and it hasn't been earmarked for any particular speaker. So Mike, Richard and Jonathan, respectively, if you can. In terms of what level of quality assurance and monitoring of suppliers' performance should I undertake when commissioning inspections and remedial work within my properties? So I don't know whether, Mike, you want to kick off on that, bearing in mind Richard's just spoken.
Okay, thank you, Peter. You're talking about quite a lot of things there. You're talking about inspections and you're talking about remediation as well.
Yeah, that's so it's basically just a reminder, because it is a matter, should I undertake when commissioning inspections and remedial work within my properties, what level of quality assurance and monitoring of suppliers' performance should I undertake? So maybe it's a line maybe about what level of quality assurance and monitoring of suppliers' performance should I undertake. So maybe tackle it on the commissioning inspections.
Yeah, with regards to inspections, it's just sort of demonstrating competency, really. So it's very, very difficult because it depends on experience, it depends on qualification. I would expect most organisations or people doing inspections to have a minimum qualification of P402. They may do it in-house, but then they may need support for a consultancy just to make sure that they're on the right level. It's a difficult one because if they're then challenged about who was competent to do this, if they haven't got qualifications to back up, it might be a bit of an issue. But certainly experience goes a long way.
And Jonathan, Richard, anything to add to that? I know, Jonathan, we welcome you back. I know you had to slightly leave the webinar earlier, but is there anything you want to add to that?
Only briefly, just in terms of like demonstrating competence, there's a handy fallback you can use, which is for accredited bodies. We're accredited by UCAS, and they produce guidelines of what are the minimum levels of qualification and experience to do things like doing a survey, taking a sample, doing a re-inspection. So if you look at a UCAS document called RG8, and I think it's table number 2, it has a breakdown in there, table number 1 or table number 2, it's got a breakdown in there of the minimum requirements, which would be the P402, the RSPH level 3 in asbestos surveying, and then an amount of experience to go with it. I can't remember top of my head what it is, an amount of experience to go with it as well. So as an organisation, if you use those as a criteria for your suppliers to say, anyone you're sending to site to do the inspections must be at least competent to this level, and then to check and see whether they hold accreditation for doing the inspections. It's not essential to have accreditation, but it is an extra level of assurance for you as to the standard that they're going to be carried out at. So yeah, would that answer your query a little bit?
That's great, and yeah, from that perspective. Moving on, I've got another question, and it's mainly for you, Jonathan. I know you've just spoken there. It's from a participant that mentioned a bit of your, if you recall, your, in their words, alarming graph about the death associated with asbestos and linked it with other fatal accidents. It was just more about the lines of, necessarily, it's not common knowledge. So how do you raise the profile of that, or is it more about how you ensure that?
How do you raise the profile of the asbestos risk? Because then the number of people who die from it each year.
The consequence of it, I think the individual was so alarmed by the graph that it's more of a thought piece rather than an actual direct question.
Yeah, it's a bit of an odd one, because the big problem with asbestos is the fact that you can have an exposure and you won't notice. Yeah. If you, I would use the example of, if you lit your finger and stick it in a power socket, you know, I'm not going to do that again. But with asbestos work, if you work on an ACM or you damage an ACM or you become exposed, you probably will not know that you've potentially injured yourself. And then you've got what we call the latency period for the diseases, where some of them don't occur until like between 20 and 60 years down the line. And obviously the degree of exposure you had, the fibre type that was involved, and so on, and whether it was repeated exposures. So it can fall, the hazard falls off people's radar, which is why it built up, and we have so many of these people now coming through with the asbestos diseases. Now, the people who are dying now, who are contributing to the stats for last year's deaths, for example, they would have had their exposures 20, 30 years ago. When our buildings were in a different state, we were in a different condition, the regulations and the way they were applied were different. We were working in a completely different framework. So the effect of the regulations that have come in since then, and the improvements in standards, both in the work that are done, the awareness training that's given to the tradesmen, so one of the groups of people that I pointed out earlier on, and so on, is meaning that in the future, that's why we're going to have lower numbers coming forward with those diseases. So we're sort of working now to reduce 30 years hence their asbestos death burden, if you understand. Yeah.
I think that. Sorry.
Oh, Mike. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the fly in the ointment is the fact that people are tending to live longer as well, so it's delaying that dip. Obviously there's just been a downward trend in age expectancy or life expectancy recently, so that may increase the dip a little bit more, because if people don't live as long, there's less chance of them to realize a lung related disease.
Yeah, I think from that point of view, I think yeah, we've had a couple of points around that particular graph, Jonathan, in respect to your presentation. So I think it's probably that aspect that's hit or resonated with some of the audience about
Yeah,
the.
it used to be called the hidden killer, didn't it, by the HSE, because of that, because it was such a sort of insidious thing. And unfortunately for us, HSE's focus has shifted in terms of where they spend their limited funding. So you would have seen a lot more promotion of safety around, for example, working at height over the last few years, and less of asbestos. So we had a big drive on asbestos, like whatever it was, 10 or so years ago from HSE. And then budgets changed and they couldn't afford that to keep pushing that same agenda. So you've moved on to a different area of enforcement, but it's still there. And there's still people who are working oblivious to the risks. That's kind of what we're working to try.
So in terms of training, knowledge is still very fundamentally key around this subject, just to ensure that it doesn't never happen again.
Yeah, it's promoting the asbestos awareness right down through the different working groups, both the estate managers, the people who are actually responsible for operating the property, so the duty holders themselves, also the contractors, and by the contractors I mean the likes of your tradesmen, your electricians, your data engineers, your IT staff by that as well, your plumbers and so on, for them to gain the awareness. But a lot of them are self-employed contractors, and they won't have a health and safety team telling them all these things they need to know. So it's down to the clients sometimes to put it as a prerequisite to say, have you done this? Can you confirm that you've received training of this type? Show me the certificates. Or for clients to lay on training for their suppliers, it is another option that's available as well, to make sure that all the staff working on their sites have been caught by this sort of awareness push.
Yeah, well, that's great. And Richard, just to bring you into the debate, we've had a question in here about probably mainly on your bio, so maybe blame me for that in the sense that I read it out today, but mainly looking at maybe some of the senior leaders within organisations, particularly around the health and environmental side of things, and obviously climate change, in terms of how has the view of your 23 years experience changed at that level? Particularly not necessarily about asbestos, but that would be good if you could bring it into the discussion, but mainly around the health and environmental, well, essentially the climate crisis that now is probably heavily now in the public domain more than it's ever been.
That's a big question, isn't it, Peter? Yeah, look, it was well and truly on the agenda in the rooms I circulated in. So if you're looking at sort of FTSE 100 type organisations, I think actually, yeah, the journey that we're looking at now to things like carbon neutral undertakings by 2050, I think it's 2045 in Scotland is the ambition, is well and truly on the agenda. From what I've seen, there's lots of work going on to actually prepare and understand how businesses are contributing around carbon footprint, energy use, waste management as well. And it's almost, I would say, you've got health, safety and environment are the sort of three areas that are talked around, and well, safety is always shouted about, health is just behind it, and environment was whispered. I think people are starting to shout environment a lot more now, Peter, and certainly from what I've seen, there's a lot of planning activity and understanding, and a lot of that drops into requirements around financial reporting and CR reporting as well. So that's really been driven through as well by that side of things. So it's certainly something that's needs to be looked at. It's very political, it's very social at the moment, as we all know, whether you're looking at climate protesting or whether you're looking at, you know, individuals in the public eye promoting things like single-use plastics. I know has made a massive difference in everybody's lives since that's been promoted through David Attenborough's documentaries, but all good stuff, you know. From a health side of things, I think, you know, certainly again, I can see a lot more promotion around that. We were always very keen to talk about asbestos as an occupational health issue at the large organisation I worked at, on the basis of the estate portfolio was very old and had a large amount of asbestos to manage within it. So it was always on the risk register for the business as being quite a high impact as far as business continuity, and it was, you know, really promoted from that perspective. And things like mental health have certainly been on the agenda for the last couple of years as well, and I think again publicized well in you know, the social channels, on lots of media outlets as well. So yeah, lots going on in that space, and I think it will continue to do so.
No, that's great, Richard, and apologies, it was a big question, but I think you answered it very well, and a lot more work to be done, particularly in our sector as well, hasten to add, but many sectors in tackling that crisis. So I'm aware of time for our audience. We had a couple more questions in, and I'm aware that I will pass them on to the respective speakers to answer and get back to you. So yeah, this concludes our Q&A, but I want to thank the speakers for obviously answering that, some of those questions. So a big thank you to Jonathan, Mike and Richard respectively, obviously tackling the issue around asbestos, and hopefully as an audience member you realise the importance, which many of you probably did, in terms of how we manage it and the risk around it, the training available. Also from the Institute for Workplace and Facilities Management perspective, how we broker a closer relationship with FAM, which is obviously mentioned on this presentation. I link both the Institute's remits together around such an important topic, as I mentioned. So once again, thank you, Jonathan, Mike and Richard. Just to remind the audience members that this webinar will be available on our website, so please share amongst your colleagues, clients, to spread the knowledge. And as I say, the conversation won't stop here with the webinar. As I say, we're looking to explore further collaboration and partnerships with FAM to continue to debate around this important subject. And lastly, but not least, thank you for actually joining us on the webinar today. I appreciate you've taken time out of your busy day jobs to join us, and hopefully we've given you a little bit of knowledge back around such a vital subject. So thank you again.